Hi, how you doing? This is Brian Cain with the Brian Cain Mental Performance Mastery Podcast. And today we've got a repeat guest, one I'm super excited about. Dr. Rob Gilbert is just one of those guys a lot of people would love to have the chance to talk with. If you've listened to part one of our interview with him, you'll know exactly why. If you haven't listened to it yet, I'd recommend you pause here and recommend going back and listening to that one first. I mean, he is, of course, the creator of Success Hotline, which has been inspiring listeners and equipping them with knowledge and insights into success, leadership, motivation, mindset, and overcoming adversity for nearly 3 decades. You can hear the daily updated show by calling Success Hotline at 973-743-4690 or subscribing to his Success Hotline podcast. Now, because his show has inspired so many great athletes and performers over the year, we decided to invite a few of them on to today's call for another installment with Dr. Gilbert, this time focusing on the art and the power of storytelling. So we've got many additional guests here that we'll field questions from and use them here on the podcast. Also welcome those guests in at different times. Super excited about today's. This is a new kind of format. First time we've tried it. So it won't be perfect, but we will make progress. Dr. Gilbert, welcome to today's podcast about the art and power of storytelling.
Well, thank you for having me back. Is my sound okay?
Sounds fantastic.
Good. And if it's all right with you, I'm very, very happy to talk about storytelling. But storytelling is storytelling. You know, everybody tells stories. What I'd like to focus on is a very, very thin part of storytelling. It's giving pep talks. Now, I'm sure everybody on this talk or on this call knows what an ergogenic aid is. An ergogenic aid is something that improves performance, like steroids improve performance. You know, there are a lot of training techniques and training things that will improve performance. But I think the greatest ergogenic aid in the world is the human voice. The human voice used correctly could improve anybody's performance almost instantly, and it doesn't cost anything. For example, suppose it's the olden days. Remember when we used to go to movies? So you're in a theater with 200 or 300 people, and you're watching a movie, and everybody's relaxed and paying attention, and all of a sudden somebody screams out just one word with terror in their voice. They scream out, "Fire!" All they do is scream out, "Fire!" and all 200 or 300 people immediately take action. They get out of there. You know, that's what I'm talking about. We could, by using our voice correctly, we could improve any person in the world to do anything better. But you have to know what you're doing. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like all of us to share stories. And, you know, some of the stories might be pleasant. Some of the stories might be unpleasant. Let me tell you an unpleasant story. Now, we're talking about how you could use your voice, how you could say stories, tell stories, use quotes, you know, to get people to jump higher, run faster, lift more, win, compete better. So does this sound all right, Brian?
Well, all in.
Okay. So let me tell you a story about graduate school. The last thing you have to do before you get a PhD is you have to write a dissertation. So after it's only taken me 8.5 years to get to the dissertation stage. So I bring in the first draft of my dissertation to Dr. Walter Kroll. And I drop it off. And he said, well, let's see. It was a Thursday. He said, why don't you come back on Tuesday? So we make a time on Tuesday at 2:30. So 2:30 on Tuesday, I knock on his door. I walk in his office. And I'm standing there uncomfortably. And I said, Dr. Kroll, you know, are we going to meet about my dissertation, you know, my first draft? And he didn't motivate me, but he did. He pointed to the wastebasket and it said, it's over there. He put my dissertation in the wastebasket. So I said, well, I picked it up. I said, well, I guess I should schedule another appointment. He said, yeah, that might be a good idea. So all of a sudden I realized I had to play this game on a much higher level than I was playing it, you know? So that's what we're talking about. What has happened in your life what coach, what teacher, they said something. It might have been a long talk. It might have been a short talk. It might have been a talk to a team. What have they done and how have they done it to get you to perform better? And I think this is the greatest ergogenic aid in the world. So, a lot of people work out. Good athletes work out, but great athletes outwork. So how could we get athletes, not to just work out, to outwork themselves, to outwork others? And of course, one of the things we could do is we could tell stories. So some of the stories I love to tell about outworking other people have to do with maybe the greatest professional football player ever, Jerry Rice. And if you ever watch videos on YouTube, in the off season, he used to work out 6 to 8 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours a day. And it ended his workouts by running up a mountain, not a hill, a mountain. And then it ended by running wind sprints up and down the mountain. And they'd ask him, they say, Jerry, how do you do this? He said, well, a lot of times I don't feel like it. A lot of times it's really difficult. But when I feel like I'm going to pass out, when I feel like I'm going to throw up, I just fight through it. I just fight through it. And those are the 3 key words, fight through it, because we're all going to be like Jerry. We're doing a wall sit and we want to quit, fight through it. We're doing a max on a bench press. We have to fight through it. So I want to introduce the hardest working athlete I've ever met in my life. Our relationship came about because Brian Cain told Mark about me, and he told me about Mark. And we're all going to have a chance to watch Mark this summer. He's in the Premier Lacrosse League. He plays for Team Chaos. He was just elected captain of the team. And we did a workshop the other day with a high school basketball team, because last year, he is the only athlete I know that ever won a Teammate of the Year award. In most pro sports, they don't give Teammate of the Year award. So, Mark, welcome to our podcast. Hey there.
I will unmute him. Let's see. Mark.
I am here.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So, Mark, tell us about a time in your life when a coach, a teacher, a parent, a doctor, they motivated you out of your head.
Well, that would be Brian Cain. It was the first time I was ever introduced to the mental game. I was a junior in college. We had a Ivy League championship game at Brown University. And I remember we had just finished speaking to Brian as a team. However, I reached out to him via text. He allowed me to come to his hotel room, and we sat down for less than an hour. But in that hour, it was life-changing. And what he made me focus on was what was important at hand on the very next thing in my life. I was thinking about academics as a student. I was thinking about relationships in my life. But the last thing I was thinking about was the game tomorrow. And what Brian Cain really did a great job of is making me focus on where my feet are. And it's easier said than done. However, I remember that moment being an inflection point in my life where I was able to rest easy, be able to play one of the best games I've ever played. And then me, along with my team, Yale University, won an Ivy League championship the very next day. But that was an inflection point in my life. Even it was just a pep talk from the very own Brian Cain.
So, Brian, why don't you tell us a story you told last week about how you went through this unbelievable physical transformation and what sparked that?
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I never knew that was such a pivotal point for you, man. It's awesome. And I think for the coaches listening to this, one of the key things to take away from Mark's story is, he looks at that as a pivotal point, and I don't remember that, and I think that's the thing when you're coaching and you're just doing what you do and you care about people and you make yourself available. One of the greatest characteristics of a coach is availability. And when you're available for people, every day, doing what you do, living your life, caring about people can change someone's life. And I think that same thing happened for me. I was a high school athletic director at North Country High School up in Newport, Vermont. It was on the Canadian border. Small town, not a lot going on, maybe one restaurant. I was a high school athletic director full-time, 24 years old. and had gotten into the routine of, wake up really early and go to the office, work all day, sitting in a chair, go home late at night and have a pizza and a couple beers for dinner, watching the Red Sox, rinse and repeat for 3 years. And I got to the point where I was 240 pounds. I was driving to the airport with a 42-inch waist and my button popped off my pants, landed on the windshield. And I had to stop and get a pair of 44s before I jumped on the plane. And later that year, I had one of my mentors, Dr. Declan Connolly, who passed away in February of a heart attack. He was skiing in February of 2020. He was skiing in France, and they found him dead of a heart attack. And one of the things that Declan said to me, of the many things that I'll remember, was he came up to speak to all of our coaches and athletes and parents when I was an AD there. And he said, "Mr. Cain," he had this Irish accent, "Mr. Cain, I'm going to bring my bike. Make sure you have a bike. We'll get some riding in. There's a great lake up there, Lake Memphremagog. I want to ride around it." So we came up and we jumped on the bikes from the house. And about 3 miles in, I had to peel off and stop and felt like I was dying. And he turns around and comes back. He goes, "Mr. Cain, you're not in great shape right now. I wasn't going to say something to you, but I wanted to see how you put out on the bike." And he goes, "Look, if you want to work with all these great athletes like a Deneen Taylor, like a Jason Fowler, you want to work with a Mark Lassini who won the Pat Tillman run in New York City, which I want to hear the story about. If you want to work with these great athletes at Yale University and UFC fighters," he goes, "you got to look the part." He said, "If you want to work in peak performance, you have to model peak performance." He says, "How you live speaks a lot louder than your words." He said, "Leaders aren't fought. You got to get your shit in shape." And that day changed my life, because the thing I wanted to do most was I wanted to coach. And by him, and he was right, and it hurt, but by him saying, "Brian, you're not walking the walk, you're just talking the talk," I didn't want to be that guy. I wanted to be the guy who would talk the talk and who would walk the walk. And just the other day, clocked in at 178 pounds, sub 10% body fat. My wife got me a pair of 32-inch shorts and had to bring them back because they were too big. So I don't know if I'm at the right spot, but I'm in a good spot, 60 pounds lighter than I was when Declan Connolly delivered me to that message. And I can say that physically getting yourself, you don't have to be an Ironman, you don't have to be a professional lacrosse player or a rodeo world champion or a Ironman world champion like we have on the call here today, but you do have to move, you do have to energize yourself, and you do have to live what it is you're teaching, I think, if you want to be successful and you want it to come across genuine.
And so when Dr. Conley gave you that pep talk, that was like a punch in the stomach, right?
Yeah, maybe even a little bit lower, but yeah.
But the whole thing is, but was it effective?
100% effective.
It was effective. So that's the whole thing. We could actually see how effective it is. Now, I train people to give pep talks. And one of the first things I tell them, if you think you're just going to give a pep talk the day before the big game and do magic, it's not going to work out that way. You have to give pep talks every single day, because you don't know what's going to stick. What would work for Brian Cain, another person would get so offended they drop Dr. Conley's course. So you have to show movies, you have to show videos, you have to post quotes, you have to tell stories, you have to contact, you have to do everything, because you want to get everybody. So listen to this. A team of lions led by a lamb will always lose to a team of lambs led by a lion. A team of lions led by a lamb will always lose to a team of lambs led by a lion. We have to be the lions. We have to be the lions. And one of the things we have to get going for us is, how do we inspire people with words? How do we inspire people? How do we do things to get them not to believe in us, but to get them to believe in ourselves? So if anybody has any questions about anything, just stop what I'm saying. Because most of the people we work with do not believe in themselves. Most people we work with, everybody we work with, they're not lacking it, they're blocking it. They have it, they just don't even know they have it, or they're blocking what they have. And our job is to unblock so they can unlock the secrets and the treasures they have inside them. So here's one of the things, if we were doing a workshop in person, here's one of the things I'd do right now. I said, okay, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Now, what I'd like you to do is, I'm going to give you a 3-second test, but I want you to agree you're going to give an all-out 100% physical effort on the test. So if you don't want to give an all-out 100% physical effort on the test, just sit down. Most people won't sit down. So I said, okay, here's the test. What I want you to do is I want you to raise your left hand as high as you can. Raise your left hand as high as you can. Stretch from the elbow, stretch from the shoulder, stretch from the rib cage. Okay. As soon as you get as high as you can, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there. Excellent. Okay. Now what I want you to do is get your left hand a quarter of an inch higher. And everybody will get their hand at least a quarter inch higher. And I'll wait 3 beats and I'll say, isn't that amazing? And then I say, okay, put your hand down. And I say, what just happened? And most people won't get it. I say, you know what just happened? Is you lied to yourself. You told me you're going to do your best and you just did better than your best. And this works 100% of the time. Everybody could always give that extra quarter of an inch. So after 40 years of teaching, I've had people come back and say, that was a pivotal thing when you did that exercise. Another way I do it, if you want to be cute here, is you bring a little used up old-fashioned tube of toothpaste, something that's really been used. And you bring somebody out from the class and you say, hey, Brian, do you think there's anything left in this tube of toothpaste? And you say, nah, it looks pretty depleted to me. I said, see if you could squeeze it and get a little more out. And of course, you always could get a little more out. You could always get a little tiny bit more out of the toothpaste. Third way I do try to make the same point is I have somebody jump up against the wall as high as they can. I give them a magic marker. I said, jump as high as you can, as high as you can, as high as you can. Of course, I make a whole big story about how you're being recruited by a big time college basketball team. And they want me to check, I'm your high school basketball coach, and they want me to check your vertical jump. And so I have the person jump as high as they can. And I say, you sure that that's as high as you go? Yep, that's as. And if they don't say, no, I can do better. Okay, do it again. Do it again. So I get them to agree that that's the best they could do. And then I put a $20 bill, I tape it 3 inches higher. And after 30 years of doing this, every single person has gotten the $20 bill. Now, if I'm speaking for a corporate group and, they're paying me more money, I'll do it with $100. But I'll do it with $1. It's going to work all the time. Why? For the same reason the raising your hand a quarter inch higher is going to work. Because the first time the person did not have a specific goal. The second time they had a specific goal. The first time you raised your hand as high as you could, then I said a quarter inch, you could do it. So once you have a specific goal, you could do amazing things. So this is just one thing you could do, but here's what we're selling. Here's what I'm trying to sell you. And here's what I want you to sell, whether you're working one-on-one with a client, with a basketball team, a football team, or you're giving an in-service for 1 million teachers. What we're selling is not information. We're selling inspiration. People could go other places for information. There aren't too many places you go to for inspiration. If you want the Sanskrit word, it's called Shaktipad. Shaktipad means exchange of energy. In India, exchange of energy between the guru and the disciple. In America, it could be exchange of energy between the coach and the athlete, between the rock star and the spectators, between the teacher and the student. There has to be an exchange of energy. Now, we all have energy. And my students say, they're not into this Eastern type. What are you talking about, energy? So here's what I do. You can do this right now. Okay, so everybody rub their hands together like this. Rub your hands together like this, okay? Rub your hands together for 5 to 10 seconds. Rub, 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 rub. And then put your hands about 1 inch apart and close your eyes. And do you feel the energy? That's your own energy. We have energy inside us right now. And that's what we have. See, people are not lacking energy. They're blocking energy. So every once in a while, I'm talking about this stuff, and a student tells a better story than I could tell. And then I steal the story forever. So he thought, Dr. Gilbert, this happened to me last Thursday. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, that whole thing about not lacking energy, blocking energy, it was Thursday night, and I was at the library studying, and it was about 7 o'clock, 7:15, I fell asleep all over my books. I fell asleep. And it's about 8 o'clock. I'm totally exhausted. And one of my fraternity brothers woke me up. He said, hey, Jeffrey, there's a party off campus. Let's go. Jeffrey says, the next thing I know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm still partying. So what happened at 7 o'clock? He wasn't lacking energy. He was blocking energy. He's probably reading some boring chemistry book or something. Then all of a sudden, he unblocks the energy. He unlocks the energy. He could do it. So we're selling Shaktipat. So as I mentioned in our last podcast, before I teach any class or before I give any talk, I look at the door that people came in and the door that people are going to leave. And I say, these people are going to leave, even today. My goal is to hope that you leave more energized after the talk than when you came on to the talk. And one way I could get you to be more energized leaving this talk is that if I could give you something and you say, wow, I could use that. So if I could give you something you could use, this has been worthwhile. If I give you theoretical stuff, okay, Yerke's curve and, the 4 steps to learn, I could give you that stuff. But unless you're going to use it, it's not going to excite you. It is absolutely not going to excite you. Okay? So, how are we doing so far? So here's what I'd like you to do. Is there anybody that is working one-on-one with a client? You're giving a talk, you're doing a podcast, you're working with people in person or whatever. Is there anything that you need immediately that you could use tomorrow, the next day, or over the weekend? Is there any type of story? And when I talk about a pep talk, I'm not just talking about telling stories. I'm talking about activities. I'm talking about group activities together. So is there anybody here that we could give you something that you could use immediately?
Yeah. And if you can put this in, maybe put it in the group chat and I'll kind of field the questions, Dr. Gilbert, and I'll field them and kind of send them to you. That way might be easier. So if anybody has a situation, a client you're working with, a talk that you're giving, a Zoom call that you're doing, if you want to post in the group chat, we can kind of help support there. Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things that becomes key, Dr. Gilbert, with what you're talking about is a concept called speed of implementation. And speed of implementation, or what I call the 24-hour rule, is that when you hear a new story or you just give that activity about raise your hand, now raise it 3 inches higher, raise it 3 inches higher, is as a coach or a speaker, go and practice. Even if it's practicing in front of a mirror, practicing on your spouse, practicing on your friends, practicing on someone, so that the story goes from Dr. Gilbert to you and you hear it, but now you practice it. And every time you do it, if you do it just once, remember, it's a start that stops most people. If you tell that story once, you're that much more likely to use it when you're speaking or you're trying to inspire a team. And I think that's one of the benefits that I had calling Success Hotline for so many years as a high school athletic director, is I could bounce into a classroom and see if I could get 3 teachers or 3 minutes or 5 minutes from the teacher. And I would try to do something like that, an activity in the class. So finding out where you can use that. But anybody want to post in our group chat of a story or situation? And this one comes in here, Dr. Gilbert from JG LaRock out of Ontario, Canada. He says, keeping teams in his baseball program motivated during COVID-19 while they're still not in-person practices. So ways to inspire his athletes to train when they're on their own, independent, and they're not in team setting yet.
Mm. Well, whether it's COVID or non-COVID, whether you're in season or out of season, there's one thing for sure. If you're going to do things that other people are not willing to do, you'll get things other people are never going to get. So with the way I look at speaking, teaching, motivating, whatever, is what you have to do is you have to look at it multidimensional. You can't just tell a story. You have to tell a story. You have to have an activity. You have to show a video. You have to have, interaction. You can't just say, okay, I gave them the facts. No, you have to give them the fact that you tell. So if I were going to talk about, what I just said, if you do things other people won't do, you'll get things other people won't get. So one day I'm at a book signing in Princeton, New Jersey. And it's by the sitting U.S. Senator from New Jersey, Bill Bradley, who was an All-American basketball player at Princeton. He played for the Knicks. I think he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And I bought his book. So since I bought his book, he had to sign my book. And since he had to sign my book, I had a chance to speak to him. I said, Senator Bradley, in your whole athletic career, what's the most motivational moment of your whole life? He said, well, I was back in high school. I was back in Missouri, Crystal City, Missouri, I think he's from. And he said, one day after practice, my coach said, Bill, when you're not practicing, somebody else is. And when you play him, he's going to beat you. When you're not practicing, somebody else is. And when you play him, he's going to beat you. He said, that got me to the next level. I decided right there, nobody was going to outwork me. So, JG, I would say one of the things you have to hit your kids with every day is anybody could be trained to do anything if they get the right training and they follow through and they outwork the competition. So, no matter what they have, if you have a kid that's 13 years old and he wants to become a switch hitter, he could become a switch hitter if he gets the proper training, he puts in the proper amount of time. If you have a basketball player that could drive to the right, but he can't drive to the left if he puts in the proper amount of time. So this is the basis for everything I believe. I believe anybody could be trained to do anything. Anybody could be trained to do anything. And I hope you believe that too. But you have to follow through and you have to show them. I show my students things that I've trained myself to do, like ripping a deck of cards. Like last week on the podcast, I put a ice pick up my nose. Now, that's not anything to be proud of, but I got the right strategy. I got the right training from an expert. So if you know what they want to be great at, and I do mean great, I don't mean good. And one of the things that people, they shoot themselves in the foot is they don't have big enough goals. Their goals aren't big enough. They say, well, I just want to be on the high school team. I'm at war against average. It's not exciting to be average. So I tell my students at Montclair State, I say, remember you got that letter from Montclair State, and Montclair State was your dream school, and you got that letter in the mail, and it was kind of thick letter, and you say, oh, maybe this is an acceptance letter, and you open it up that afternoon, and it was, we are pleased to inform you that you will be in the class of 2024 at Montclair State University, and you smashed the desk that you were reading it on, and you said to yourself, I can't wait to get to Montclair State. I can't wait to be a BC student. I can't wait to be second string on the football team. I can't wait to just be in one or two clubs. I'll just be a member. I won't be anything. You didn't say that. You say, I'm going to be the best student ever. I'm going to have the greatest college experience ever. Then after a while, we gravitate because of the people we hang around with. But, we don't want to be average. There is no part of us that wants to be average. There is no part of us that wants to be average. We want to be exceptional. But then when we start hanging around with average people, average seems okay. I always tell my students, I don't know if this is based on real research. I say, you want to know what your grades are going to be this semester? You find out the grades of the 3 people at Montclair State that you hang around with the most, and you add up their grade point average and divide by whatever. And whatever the average of their grade point average is going to be your grade point average. So if you hang around with people, one got a 3.0, one got a 3.5, and one got a 4.0, you're going to get a 3.5. If you hang around with people that are 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, you're going to get a 1.5. And it's the same thing with any area. So you want to hang around people who are at war with average. You want to hang around people that are extraordinary. So as I mentioned before, Mark Licini, I've never met an athlete that works as hard as he does at any level. I would say there's no professional athlete in the world that outworks Mark Licini on a given day. So Mark, who's in your peer group? Who do you interact with the most that's also an athlete?
My best friend, a guy who didn't know how to competitively swim 1 year ago and is now a top 5% Ironman athlete. I met him as a sophomore in my chemistry class, and that started with me not doing so well in chemistry. I turned to my left and I say, hey, man, I'm not really getting this. And he knew I was an up and rising athlete within the school. And he said, I'll help you out if you show me what you do in the weight room and how to train. And then we formulated a friendship like that. And the story I like talking about him is I was in the mindset of doing pull-ups and handstands because I believe in discipline, individual discipline, and you can be better for others if you're able to hold yourself up or pull yourself up. And it's a metaphor I use in life. So the first time we were working out, I asked him to do a handstand till failure. And he starts wobbling all over. And I said, that's good, man. That's good. And he keeps wobbling. Feet fall and crash to the right side. He shatters a mirror, looks up to me with those bulging eyes. And I knew he was going to be my best friend from that moment forward. And he still is to this day. And he's gone on this trajectory, which you guys were talking about earlier. I wanted to jump in the fact that hearing Brian Cain, you talk about where you used to be and now where you are. We're not into where we are in terms of location. We're into our trajectory, right? And surrounding myself with a person like Anka, who's the Ironman athlete I was just telling a story about. he pushes me indirectly. And I think that's important to have people in your environment that push you indirectly. There's nothing that needs to be said. Sometimes words are there's a time and place for those. But to me, it comes down to, have you ever read the book by Teddy Atlas, understanding the difference between a truth and a lie. And Teddy Atlas talks about the truth being that submission is not an acceptable option. And you start hanging out with people that start to believe that. And then you go a step further in what Brian Cain was talking about in terms of authenticity as a coach, leader, or trainer. You teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are, right? And that goes for a friend group. That goes with the team and what you surround yourself on. So if you want to reproduce people like you better start finding wind rather than anchors, if we're going to use a boat metaphor, right? Because that wind, when it comes to individuals and the people that are part of your inner circle, that's the easiest way to enhance your life.
Okay.
Awesome. Dr. Gilbert, we got other questions coming in when the time is right.
Okay. So let me just do a demonstration. This is a deck of cards. Okay. So one of the nice things about being a college professor is you can invite people to come to your class and they'll come to your class. And so I always have strongmen come to my class. Russell Jones, Eric comes all the time. And one of the things that most strongmen do is they take a deck of cards and they rip them in two, okay? But they do, I just did the jokers, they do all 52 decks. So Russell came to my class one day and he ripped a deck of cards. Then after he ripped the deck of cards, I said, teach me how to do this. See, I totally believe that everybody has the ability and all they're lacking is a strategy. Everybody has the ability, all they're lacking is the strategy. So he said, he showed me how to do it. He said, you hold it this way, and then you hold it like this, and then you rip it, and you come like this. And so I tried, and I couldn't do it. He said, he gave me one suit. He gave me 13 cards. I could do it. He gave me 2 suits. I could do it. He gave me 3 suits, 39 cards. I could barely do it. He said, okay. He said, go to the dollar store, buy all the cards you can. There are 2 decks for $1. He said, starting tomorrow, I want you to start doing just one rep a day, just 39. Do 39 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then the next week you start on 40 once a day. Then 41, then 42. I got up to 42. I said, okay, in about 6 weeks I'll be able to do it. And then I got up to 43, but I couldn't do 44. I mean, how did my body know the difference between 43 and 44? I have no idea. So I went back to Russell and I said, Russell, how come I could do 43, but I can't do 44? He said, well, let me see you do 44. I said, well, I can't do 44. He said, well, show me that you can't do it. So I did it and I couldn't do it. And he gave me the whole deck. He said, you could do all 52 right now. I said, Russell, you just saw me not do 44. How could I do 52? He said, just when you're going to quit, that's when the cards are going to rip. If you just stuck with it a second longer. So from that moment on, I've been able to do 52 cards. So let's see how we do today. Boom. So now, first of all, I'm 73 years old. Second of all, could you do this? Yes, I could train you to do this. Not only can I want to train you to do this. So if you want to learn how to rip a deck of cards, am I still on, Brian?
Yes.
If you want to learn how to deck of cards, you just get in touch with me. But first of all, buy about as many decks as you can. And then I'll train you how to do it because I know you could do it. I mean, I don't care how young you are. I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're male. I don't care if you're female. I don't care if you're 280 pounds or 80 pounds. Everybody could do it. I've had a lot of women do it. I've had a lot of guys do it. I've had a lot of women quit. I've had a lot of guys quit. But nobody that stayed with me. So it might take you a week. It might take you a day. It might take you a month, but you'll be able to do it. So when I'm doing stuff like that.
Dr. Gilbert, could you just tilt your camera down a little bit here? Always see. There we go. There we go.
Now, where do I go back to here? So when you do something, so see, the thing is, when you try to motivate people, people won't believe what you say, but they will believe what you do and what they do. So if you could do something, or if you could get them to do something, all of a sudden that makes you much more credible, much more trustworthy. So when they say this guy's, like Brian was saying, he's walking the talk, Okay. We wanted to get to something from the chat.
Yeah. One of the questions comes in from Jason Fowler, who is a triathlon world champion. He says, I'm working with a group of wheelchair racing athletes, wheelchair racing kids. They have very limited mental toughness. Noticing that they're giving up too easily, how do I give them a new perspective?
Well, first of all, I would never tell them that they have limited mental toughness, because you, Jason, you're at a different level than they are. And you have to give them, and Brian, you can help me with this. You have to set tasks that they could be successful at. Don't try to, I'm a lot older than anybody on this call, except for one person. My mother's here, by the way. And Brian, I don't think you remember this. Do you remember when football coaches, they would withhold water from you during practice?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they thought that they were training you to be mentally tough by not taking water. Could you imagine working out this summer in Arizona and the coach says, don't take any water? So, that's crazy. So we have to, nothing succeeds like success. Nothing succeeds like success. So you give them a task that they can't possibly fail at. What do all the SEC teams do? Like my alma mater, UMass, is really, really upset about this whole COVID thing. You know why? Who is Auburn going to play for the first game of the year? UMass. And they're going to get $1.6 million to play Auburn. But Auburn knows nothing succeeds like success. You get these wimpy football players from Amherst, Massachusetts, and you'll have success. So figure out something they could be successful at. Then you praise them to death. Great job, great job. And then you increase it. Then you give them a little more. Get them addicted to praise, and they get them addicted to feeling good about doing something. So you don't put them, metaphorically speaking, don't put them at the foul line and say, okay, we want to get 8 out of 10 foul shots. Put them right under the basket and have them get 8 out of 10. You see what I'm saying, Jason?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want them to have, nothing succeeds like success. So don't, you could talk about mental toughness, but talk about, you did it. And I know you have it inside you. You might not know it, but I know you have it inside you. And you're a world champion, so you have credibility. Mark, when we're talking about teamwork, we were working with a high school basketball team. And when you have a teammate of the year in professional lacrosse, that gives you credibility. These kids listen to them. So people on this call have credibility,
I think the other thing too, Dr. Gilbert, is there's not only the experience in the story, that you just shared. The other one about the raising the hand and give me another 3 inches, give me another 3 inches, give me another 3 inches. And if everyone does that right now where you are, if you raise your hand and you say, okay, this is as high as I can go, and you say, give me another inch, you can always extend another inch. So I think that gives them the physical experience of, yeah, okay, I can do a little bit more. I also just posted in our chat notes from a book that just came out, one of the best books I've ever gone through. It's called Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything. It's by a guy named BJ Fogg, Fogg. He's a behavior design professor at Stanford. So it's all about habits. And the biggest take home I got from it was that behavior equals MAP. So B equals MAP. The book is Tiny Habits, BJ Fogg. And basically B equals MAP stands for that behavior is a byproduct of motivation, ability, and a prompt. And he says that if you have the motivation, if you have the ability, all you need is the prompt. And the prompt can be an alarm. The prompt can be an experience. The prompt can be a time of day. The prompt can be some part of your routine. But even with working with someone where you're trying to change a mindset like that, inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's hard. It's the start that stops most people. One of my favorite activities to use is called the doorway trigger. And the doorway trigger is that anytime you walk through a doorway in your house, let's say it's a doorway into your bathroom, you might then walk in, you look at the mirror in their bathroom, and on there it says, I can, I will, I must, or something like that. Some kind of statement that when they read, it helps kind of build that mindset and that mental toughness. It could be, Like, no matter what gets thrown at me today, good, I will use it to my advantage, and you're kind of creating that mindset, but putting it in a place where they see it when they're not with you. Put it in a place where maybe you make a group chat with your clients and or the team that you're working with, Jason, and you have them write this down on their mirror or something like that. And then they have to take a picture and put it in there. So it creates that social pressure to do it themselves. But then, okay, if they're looking at what's on their mirror, I can ask them to write this down. And then by them through repetition saying that becomes sort of their mindset. Another question, Dr. Gilbert, that came in from Tony. Tony says, my local teams being able to practice but not compete in games. After doing technical drills and strength training, sometimes kids can lose motivation, which ties right back in with B equals MAP. What's one thing I can use with them tomorrow to reignite that fire? So Tony, let me unmute you and bring you in here. Do you have them on a Zoom call tomorrow? Do you have them with a practice? How is it that you will be with your team tomorrow, Tony?
I have them in person.
Okay, perfect. So in person, and what's the team? Is it a baseball team? What's the sport?
High school soccer team.
High school soccer team. Fantastic. Male, female?
Male.
Okay, so we got a boys high school soccer team practice tomorrow, losing motivation because they're training, but there's no games that have been scheduled yet. What would you say, Dr. Gilbert?
Tony, what high school? Where are you located?
Columbus, Ohio.
What high school?
Dublin, Jerome.
Oh, good. That's a big school?
Fairly large, yeah.
Okay. Do you? How close could the kids get to each other?
Technically within 6 feet. Just pretty much no contact.
No contact. Okay. Do you know the rock paper scissors game?
I do.
Do you know the tournament rock paper scissors? A new way to play the game.
I know the old school way with just your hand. Is there?
Okay, so here's what I want you to do. There are very few things I could tell you that don't ever fail. This never fails. As a matter of fact, go to YouTube and put rock, paper, scissors tournament. So what you do is you make sure everybody knows how to play rock, paper, scissors. I had a student a couple of years ago from Wyoming, and she knew how to play rock, paper, scissors. I was amazed. Everybody knows how to play rock, paper, scissors. And then how many kids will you have there tomorrow? About 20, 24?
Probably we split them up into sessions, but 20 at the max. Yeah.
Okay. So you have 20 kids, and you say, okay, you all know how to play rock, paper, scissors. Here's what I want you to do. We're going to have a tournament. Mark's going to play Doneen best of 5. The first one to gets 5. And then when Mark wins, he finds another winner. Brian won, so he plays Brian. And then when Brian beats Mark, Brian plays another winner. So within a couple of minutes, you're going to have the finals. There are going to be 20 people there. There'll be 2 finalists, and everybody else is there. But here's the whole trick. This is what makes it different. After Mark beats Doneen follows Mark and cheers like a maniac for him. And then after Brian beats Mark, Doneen and Mark follow Brian and cheer like a maniac. So at the very end, you have 2 finalists, and you have 9 people cheering for one guy, 9 people cheering for the other guy. Does this make any sense, Tony?
Yes.
Now, at the very end, you make a big thing about the 2 finalists, like it's a heavyweight fight and all that stuff. And then at the very end, you give awards, 1 or 2 awards. Now, you don't give – so suppose Brian wins. And I said, Brian, tell me the truth. Did you win this game because you're really skilled at rock, paper, scissors? Or did you win this game because you were lucky? And if anybody tells you the truth, it's really a luck game. It's not a skill game. And you say, that's good. But there was one thing. There were 2 people here that demonstrated a skill that all of us need. And there were 2 people here that were maniac teammates. They were cheering like maniacs for the people they were following. And you say, Mark was one of them and Doneen was the other one. And then you give them little trophies or a T-shirt or something, because that's what you want to reinforce. The things that get rewarded are the things that get repeated. So does that make any sense to you?
It definitely does. Kind of like the MTE you talk about, more than expected. Those folks that
Exactly. But this has never failed me. I've done this in assembly halls with 200 kids, and you almost don't have to explain it. It's the most magical game I've ever played. Did you ever use this, Brian?
Anytime I'm with a team for the first time, I've used rock, paper, scissors since you mentioned it. And I've thrown this twist on it a little bit too, is I have them play the first time. And when you lose or you get knocked out, you just sit down.
Yeah. Okay.
And you sit down, and then at the end of the round, there's two people, they're standing up, and one person wins, and you say, hey, congratulations. And you move on to your next thing. And then you say, you pause, right? And you're like, okay, now we're going to do that again. This time we're going to bring the juice, because if you're juiceful, you're useful. And if you're juiceless, you're useless.
Yeah.
So we talk about energy being a choice. And if we're going to go all in on the controllables. And I talk about the APE, attitude, performance, how hard you're going to go, and your energy, how much you give, right? So your attitude, how you see things, your performance, how well you play or how hard you go, and your effort, how much you give. And I say, look, if we're going to be a good team at anything, or I'm going to be a good performer at anything, I've got to maximize all the things I can control. Let's start with the APE. So then I will go into, like, now when you get knocked out, you're going to choose your attitude. Your performance is going to be to give great energy. So now we're practicing the concept of APE right there in rock, paper, scissors. And it's been unbelievable.
And there are very few things I could tell you that work 100% of the time. The jumping against the wall, nobody has not got the money. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, $20, $100, they always get the money. This thing always works, and it makes the point. See, facts fade and stories stick. Stories stick. When you get people involved, that sticks. Facts, are you kidding me? Tell me how much you remember about the Krebs cycle, But if you had a teacher in class, he had a beach ball or she had a beach ball, and they made the Krebs cycle come alive. See, the thing is, I've been teaching for 40 years, and people say, how could you deal with kids nowadays? They're not involved. They're not engaged. It's not their fault. We've trained them to be that way. We've trained them to not be into it. We've trained them to be into the grades, more into the learning. It's our fault. And, we have never been in such a crisis in this country, and I've never seen such poor leadership. I mean, we have to develop leaders. We have to develop people who have courage, I mean, this is our existence. And this is exciting, because if we don't do this, if we don't have these outrageous goals, who's going to do it? And somebody once said, do you expect to change the world? And the person said, well, I don't. They were talking to a motivational speaker. Well, when I was younger, I thought I'd change the world, but now I know the secret. Somebody I speak to is going to change the world. So raise your hand a quarter-inch higher, A couple of summers ago, there's something called the Global Leadership Conference. Check it out. It's from Michigan, and it's in person at churches all over the country, but this summer it will be online. They have the best speakers. So 2 years ago, GLC, I think, Global Leadership Conference. So they have 2 days with the best speakers, church-related, non-church related. So who do you think they had? They had Cory Booker, the U.S. Senator from New Jersey. And what do you think he did? He said, everybody stand up. Raise your hand as high as you can. Raise your hand a quarter-inch higher. And then he tells a whole story about how he's been using that for 30 years, ever since he went to a workshop. Who did he go to a workshop with? When he was a junior in high school, he went to my workshop, So I might not change the world, but Cory Booker might be president one day. He might change the world. So I get a phone call. Mom, could you unmute your thing? Do you know how to unmute it? So I get this phone call from some publishing company, and they say, we're fact-checking Senator Cory Booker's new book that's coming out. And we want to make sure that we get all this information about the workshop he went to and how it changed his life. Was it in Wayne, New Jersey? No, it wasn't. Was it at a Holiday Inn? No, it was at this, So they got a lot of the little facts, but they got the big thing right. So then I check, on Amazon, I put in the thing, as soon as this book comes out, I want to be notified. So as soon as the book's out, I pre-order it. I pre-ordered 10 copies. I sent one to my mother because I'm going to be in the book. What happened, Mom?
You weren't in the book.
My mother reads a book. I wasn't in the book. 10 copies of the book. I wasn't in the book. You liked the book, though, didn't you?
I love the book.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you liked it more if your son was in the book. So my mother's a pretty good motivational speaker too. A matter of fact, the most positive feedback I ever get in 28 years on the hotline is when I have my mother speak on her birthday. Mom, how old were you this year?
98.
98. So tell everybody here, what are the secrets to getting to be 98?
What are the secrets?
Hmm.
Well, you keep busy, you think positive, and I can't think of anything else right now.
How many books have you read since this whole COVID thing has been upon us?
Oh, I can't begin to tell you.
How many operas have you watched?
Every night.
Every night. So my mother is 98 years old. I've never had a student that reads more than my mother. Matter of fact, my mother has a 3-ring binder she lists all the books she's read. She writes them down. Now, there's a little difference between my mother and I. If I'm reading a book and I don't like the book, I don't continue. What do you do if you don't like a book?
If I usually finish it.
Well,
I can't leave a book if I don't finish it.
so one day, a strong man shows me how to roll up frying pans. You take a frying pan and you roll it up, and it's an unbelievable trick. So the next time I go home to Boston to see my mother, I do this for her. And I thought she'd be like, wow, I got a strong son. You know what my mother said? Why are you wasting a perfectly good frying pan? So my mother gives me advice all the time. But one of the things, she left me a message one day. She said, call me up. There's a book you have to read, a sports book. And I'm saying to myself, my mother is not into sports. She's not into sports. How could she possibly know about a sports book? So I said, Mom, what's the book? Do you remember the name of the book that you told me about, Mom?
Yeah, The Boys in the Boat.
She told me about the best, not sports book, the best book I ever read in my life, The Boys in the Boat, the most motivational story. Way back in the 1930s, if you were on the crew, who were the national champions in crew? Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. And why were they so good? Because the crew guys went to prep school at Exeter, Andover, and Choate, where they all had crews. Somehow, these kids from the University of Washington won the national championship, and then they went to the 1936 Olympics, the Nazi Olympics, to take on Hitler's crew. And they won. It is the most amazing story. I don't know why it's not been made into a major motion picture. On YouTube, there are longer versions of it. There's short versions and longer versions. But thank you so that book inspires people. So here's what I'd like everybody to do. And why don't you put it in the chat right now? But if you feel that passionate about it, don't just put it in the chat. Tell us about it. So either put in the chat or unmute yourself. What is the book that motivated you out of your mind? Like The Boys in the Boat, out of my mind. I had to know everything about this book. So anybody want to tell us about a book and not just write about it?
Yeah, let's have them post first, and then we'll call on some people and see what we get. And as people are posting, let's see. The first one came in is from Mark Lassini. Mark, let's have you go. You talked about Life is Magic. Would you talk about that one, Mark?
Absolutely. This book is written by John Dornbos, who was a Philadelphia Eagles long snapper for 12 years, but he was also on America's Got Talent for magic tricks. And the reason why it's such an amazing book, besides the fact that you feel like you're having a steak dinner with him and it's such an easy read, that's why I recommend it so much, because not everybody's a reader, but it's an easy read. But he also talks about what he went through. And the sad part of the story is when he went off to baseball camp one day when he was 12 years old, he came home and his father had killed his mother, and that changed his entire life. However, he talks about talking to yourself rather than listening to yourself. We have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. 60 to 80% of them are negative. So why would we spend so much time listening to ourselves? And when he went through therapy as a young kid, his therapist had him write down the negative energy to release it from his head and put it down on paper. And that was very helpful. And then on the back end of it, he uses it from an applied psychology perspective, even to this day. And he writes down, rather than listening to himself, he talks to himself when he's in the car or wherever he is in life. And he still writes down aspirational goals from an applied psychology perspective, not necessarily a psychiatric perspective. And this is really, really powerful because he says it's his whole life is self-fulfilling prophecies. So this book was so powerful to me in summary, in the fact that we can sit all day and listen to the negative stuff that we have in our heads, or we can talk to ourselves in a positive manner and set aspirational goals and watch it all unfold for us.
Awesome. And let's go to Jason Fowler. Jason, you had mentioned the book Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins.
Yeah. So Awaken the Giant Within for me was the first self-help book that I ever read. And I was 18 years old, I believe, at the time. And for whatever reason, the part that stood out for me was when you're wanting to accomplish something or you're wanting to start your day, the way to do that is to create habits around increasing your energy level every day and get up and get excited. And so when I heard that for the first time, and I heard some of his principles around just how to get yourself and motivated to do things when you don't want to, it just changed my whole philosophy or just changed the way I looked at everything. And then everything became possible at that moment. So it's just this inflection point where I'm going through this book and I'm like, no. And I would reread, it would just be a couple pages and I would just be like, it just opened up the possibility for me that someone else had this stuff figured out. I was like, and that was sort of the beginning of the journey of like, okay, what other book? And then I started reading Brian Tracy and then Zig Ziglar and, all these things back in the 80s that and early 90s. And yeah, it just changed my life.
It's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, Jason, and appreciate you sharing that, Mark. And if you guys take a look here into what looks like Dr. Gilbert's office, you'll see all the books in the background there. There's a ton of them. For me, that book was Heads Up Baseball by Dr. Ken Ravizza. I went searching for, why was I such a failure as a college baseball player and a pitcher? And I went looking for answers. And I had read The Mental Game of Baseball by Harvey Dorfman. It's read kind of like a textbook. And then I picked up Heads Up Baseball by Ken Ravizza. And it read more like an ESPN The Magazine, which just really hit me in terms of how practical and applicable it was, and lots of quotes and lots of stories and, reflection from players who had gone through his program. And I couldn't put the book down. And I remember, taking the next step, right? Because Dr. Gilbert always say, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I took the book, went to the library at the University of Vermont between the summer of my junior and senior year, sent Dr. Ravizza an email, said, hey, I love your book. I'd love to study this. I'd like to learn sports psychology. And that was in June? It was July 4th when I picked up the book. I remember. So it's probably about July 8th, 2000. And now 20 years later, I have the author's face tattooed on my heart. So that book made a huge impact on me, just because, kind of like what Jason said, it showed you that there was a pathway. It showed you that, like, this wasn't a wall that was designed to keep you from moving forward. This was a wall that was designed to find out how damn bad you wanted it. And you were going to have to go look for the strategy and the answers to be able to get over that wall. And then once you got over that wall, you realized that there was going to be more walls. But the process to get over all of those walls that come your way in life is the same way you got over the first one. It's the strategy and putting that strategy into action. But if we don't go looking for the strategies, they're often not just going to show up out of nowhere. So you have to be learning. You have to be calling success outline. You have to be reading. And JG posted in here that the book that made a big impact for him, ironically, was about a team that my mentor, Dr. Ken Ravizza, used to work with, the New Zealand All Blacks, and in the book Legacy. So JG, would you talk a little bit about how that book had made an impact on you, my friend?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, yeah, Mental ABCs was probably the book for me, looking back at it now that I heard your story. But yeah, Legacy was like the first chapter, I think it is, where basically sweeping the sheds. Like, I think I just wrapped my head around sweeping the sheds the whole time, where how you do some things is how you do all things. And that just kind of started. The whole book is great, but I always come back to sweeping the sheds, where you just got to keep grinding. It doesn't matter what your status is in life or whatever the case may be. And these guys are, professional athletes cleaning their own locker rooms. I'd love to see all professional athletes do those types of things and show kids and society basically how things should be done, because they're not necessarily all the time the best role models, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, JG, appreciate you sharing that.
Now, getting back to stories, there are so many great stories out there. You should never, ever be lacking stories. So let me tell you a story about a book. I went to a talk once given by Dan Gable, there is nobody in any sport that is revered like Dan Gable is a god. He's a legend in his own time. And at the talk, he was talking about a book that he always keeps with him. Because he said, people ask me what motivates me. That's Gable talking. And he said, this book. And he reaches into his bag and he takes out this book, The Heart of a Champion by Bob Richards. And now the introduction was written by Gable, but this book originally came out in 1958. Bob Richards is the first athlete to be on the box of Wheaties, and he was a gold medal winner in the pole vault. And these are all stories about track and field. But this is what motivates Dan Gable. If you're interested in peak performance, you have to get a used copy of this book. It's called Powers of Mind by Adam Smith. He searched the world for people who were doing extraordinary things, and that's the book. And then one of my all-time favorite books is called Heart of a Champion. God, where did she ever get that name? By Doneen Taylor. So Doneen, could you get on and talk to us?
Oh, yep. Doneen, can you hear us?
Yep. Hey, guys.
So is having a book published, has that changed your life at all?
Well, it's been pretty darn cool, Doc. I mean, just to hear how my story has impacted and helped other folks. It's been, I don't know, pretty humbling. Yeah, it's changed my life.
So I tell people, if you want to become a speaker, you want your regard to be much higher, you can do one or two things. You can get an advanced degree, a master's or a PhD, or you can write a book. Writing a book is equal to getting a PhD. All of a sudden, people think you know stuff you don't know, But I would suggest everybody writes a book. And it's not that hard, especially if you're writing about something that you know about. But don't just write about something you know about, write about something you love. That's a key thing. Okay, let's go back to some things about telling stories. And especially if you want to motivate people, you have to tell the right story to the right group at the right time in the right way. You have to pick out the right story. You have to tell it to the right group at the right time in the right way. Now, there are a lot of things about telling stories. Just because people tell stories doesn't mean they tell them well. Most people do not tell stories well. There are people who I want you to, it's just like anything else. If Mark hangs around with Anka all day, he said, what are you doing? Anka will get in, put on his TV for 6 hours and get on his exercise bike for 6 hours. When you hang around with people like that they're setting the heart pretty high. One of the people I want you to check out Paul Harvey. At one time, he was America's most famous newsman. Now he's dead. Nobody knows who he is anymore. He was the best storyteller. So, Brian, you want to help me out with this? Could you read this?
Let's see. I think it says, woman without her man is miserable.
Okay, so everybody do this with Brian. Woman without her man is miserable. Now, one of the things that Paul Harvey did so well is the way he paused. Most people, what do you mean pause? Pausing is such an important part of telling stories great. So, Brian, this is going to be very difficult to do. Now, woman without her man is miserable. So the woman is miserable, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Just by pausing, how can you make the man miserable?
Woman without her man is miserable.
Yeah. Woman without her, man is miserable. So if I were going to do this grammatically, woman without her, man is miserable. So woman without her man is miserable, the woman's miserable. Woman without her man is miserable. Now I just go to show you how powerful just pausing correctly changes the whole thing. In pausing correctly, first of all, it slows down your story. So Brian, last week you told the story, and the thing that you did so great in that story was the way you paused. Can you tell that story again about, good luck, bad luck?
Trying to remember which story it was.
About the guy.
The wolf story?
Was it the wolf story, or did you tell the story about the horses left the shed and they came back with more horses? Did we do that last week?
No.
Okay.
No, I think I told the wolf story. Which one's inside?
Yeah, tell the wolf story.
So there was a young boy who was confused because he had these conflicting thoughts. He was kind of always caught and torn between doing what was right, doing what was wrong, doing what people perceived as good and what other people perceived as evil. And he felt like he had these two voices inside of him, one telling him during a workout to push, to go, the pain will pass, and the other voice telling him to stop, to slow, that the pain is real and that you might not make it if you keep going. So he was just confused. He didn't know what to do and he felt stuck. So he went to this wise man, and this wise man lived in this village. And as he waited in line to go see this wise man, he prepared his question, and he walked inside and he said, "Wise man, I feel like I have two wolves inside of me. One fighting for good, one fighting for bad. One helping me to grow, the other making me want to slow and stop. I just don't know what to do. And I feel like I'm weird, and I thought I could come into confession with you as the wise man and you'd be able to help me out." So the wise man cracks a smile. He looks at the young boy and he said, "Young boy, you're referring to the battle of the two wolves." And he paused, and the boy said, the two wolves, I'm not sure I understand, old wise man. The wise man looked at him, bent over, got closer, and said, "There's two wolves inside of us. You've experienced it. You're living it. The wolf who's going to help propel you to new levels, and the wolf that will take you where you want to go. We call that the green wolf, my spin on green light and red light. And then we have the red wolf inside of us that tells us to stop, tells us to slow down, tells us that we've put out enough, tells us that we don't need to go any further, don't need to do any more, that it's good enough. We have both of those wolves inside of us." And the young boy, as he scratched his head, looked back at the wise man and said, "Wise man, I can relate to what you're saying. I understand the two wolves. But which one's going to win the fight inside of me?" The wise man said, "Well, that's simple, my son. It'll be the one that you feed." So are you feeding yourself positive, green light, go? So who you surround yourself with, call and success hotline. Or are you feeding yourself negative, news, Tiger King reruns? Are you feeding yourself with entertainment? Or are you feeding yourself with education? Are you helping yourself to grow and go green and get to where you want to go? Or are you causing yourself to slow down and go red because you're surrounding yourself with things that are holding you back? Which wolf are you feeding? By being on this call, I know you're feeding the green wolf.
That was excellent. And if you tell stories like that, some kid is going to say, "Brian, is that a true story?" And you say, "Well, it might not be fact, but it's true." A myth is something that might never have happened, but is always happening. So did David actually beat Goliath? Well, we don't have any videotape to prove it. But are little guys always beating big guys? Did Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson? Did the Americans beat the Soviets in 1980? It's always happening. So it doesn't matter if it actually happened. It is happening. So it might not be fact, but it is true. And that's what's so great about stories. So let's talk about David and Goliath. It's the night before David's about to go on the field of battle against Goliath, and his three best friends came to see him. And it's all gloom and doom. And finally, David said, "What's wrong with you guys?" He said, "David, this is the last day we're going to see you alive." And he said, "What do you mean it's the last day?" He said, "David, Goliath is gargantuan." And David said, "Don't worry about it. There's no way I could lose." And one of his friends said, "How can you be so confident?" And he reached down, he picked up his slingshot and picks up some rocks. He said, I have my slingshot. I have 3 rocks. He's so big. How could I possibly miss? You know, how could I possibly miss? I'm the 16 seed. He's a 1 seed. Who do you think's going to be nervous? What do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose. He's not going to get a scholarship if he loses. If I win, I'm going to be the biggest star ever. So I think what Brian and I want to do is we want to inspire you to how can you motivate people out of their minds? Let me read you this quote. In Roman times, after Cicero had finished speaking, people said how well he spoke. In Roman times, after Cicero had finished speaking, people said how well he spoke. But after Demosthenes finished speaking, people said, let us march. After let's be blunt. Give me the 2 words. Why are we not speaking German on this podcast? 2 words, Winston Churchill. Probably the greatest motivational speaker of all time, an incredibly courageous guy. Mom, could you get back on the podcast? Could you unmute yourself?
Yep. I think we got her here. Yep.
Mother?
What?
What was it like? I know how it's like today. Is it worse today or was it worse during World War II?
Oh, World War II was unbelievable.
Like how?
Well, right now we don't know when the end is. But at that time, we really didn't know how it was going to end, and so many people were dying. But it was a different type of atmosphere.
And but back then, people were all pulling together, weren't they?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And we had good leadership.
Unbelievable leadership. And our best leader was from England, the pit bull, Winston Churchill. So, Mark, do you know the most famous Winston Churchill story when he went back to his old prep school? Do you know that story?
No.
Mark, do you know that story, Mark?
I do not know.
So he went after he's the hero of the free world, and he's invited back to his old prep school in England, and he gets this unbelievable introduction that lasted about 20 minutes from the head of the prep school. Then Churchill looked around, made eye contact with every member of the senior class, and he said, never, never, never give up. And he sat down. That was his story. Was that an effective story? Well, it's about 80 years later, and I'm telling it to you, so it's a pretty effective story. So in storytelling, less is more. The fewer words to make the story. You don't want to go off on all these tangents. Just tell the story and hit the point hard. And then,
Dr. Gilbert, can you one of the things you said one time, and I was hoping you could elaborate on that a little more, is the difference between the narrator and the dialogue in the story.
It's a little sophisticated, but this will get you instantly to another level of storytelling. There's two parts of the story, the narration and the dialogue. The dialogue is, the Indian chief said, there are 2 wolves fighting in your mind. That's the dialogue. The narration is, it's a nice day here in Kingston, Massachusetts, and 3 people are out, on their motorcycles or whatever. So what you want to do is you want to do the narration in the past. He said when Winston Churchill came to his old prep school and he was introduced, past. But the dialogue's in the present. And Winston Churchill said, never, never, I don't want you to ever, ever, ever give up. That's in the future. So if you listen to people who are really good storytellers, or if you read any novel, that's how it is. The narration's in the past, the dialogue's in the present. And so what you want to do is in the narration, you don't want to get emotional in the narration. Even if people are dying, even if people are getting tortured, you just tell the story. You become the actor in the dialogue. He hated his boss so much that he wanted to kill him, but he wanted to torture him slowly. And then he walked into the boss's office and he said, I hate you. That's where you put the emotion in the dialogue. Is that clear?
Yeah, brilliant.
and watch how few people do that. So, I'm absolutely convinced, because I've been teaching for 40 years, and whenever I see one of my old students, after, hey, how you doing? I say, what do you remember most about my classes? And they always say the stories. They say two things. I usually teach them how to juggle. They remember that. And I teach them the story, and I tell them stories. I tell them stories all the time. I try not to make a point without telling them a story. So, as I mentioned last week on the podcast, that a few weeks ago I wrote a book, and I'm going to read you the whole book today. It's Dr. Gilbert's one-word book on how to be extremely successful in sports, school, sales, and business. So the reason I could read you the book, because there's only one word in the book. Dr. Gilbert's one-word book on how to be extremely successful. The one word is extreme. You have to be extreme. I mean, there is nothing. If you want to give me a present, just send me a story. That's all. As a matter of fact, that's my email address. Send me a story at AOL.com. There is no present you could give me better than a story. Now, the worst thing you could do is to tell me, oh, I have this great story for you, and send me this horrible story. So this was my hotline message today, because yesterday I was speaking to some kid from Texas who wants to be a great baseball player, and he's a shortstop, and he's 12 years old. And his father wanted me to tell, what's the one most important story you could tell him? I said, well, there was a kid that grew up in San Diego, California, and all he wanted to do was to be the best hitter who ever lived. As a matter of fact, he used to tell his friends, he said, when I grow up, I'm going to walk down the street and people are going to say, there goes the greatest hitter that ever lived. His name was Theodore Samuel Williams. Theodore Samuel Williams. Ted Williams, when he was younger in high school and he was a minor leaguer, nobody hit more baseballs than Ted Williams. So I asked the kid, I said, when do you think he quit swinging the bat? When do you think he quit taking batting practice? And I said, I guess when he was tired. He said, no, he quit when his hands started bleeding. Can you imagine taking batting practice that much until your hands start bleeding? So I like that story because that's extreme. I love stories about extreme, people going to extreme levels. In 40 years of teaching, I've only had one student who ever graduated from Montclair State with a perfect 4.0 average. Her name is Dr. Melissa Sapio. When she comes to my classes, she tells a story of how when she started school her freshman year, she decided that no matter what her professors assigned her to do, she would do more than expected. So if her math professor said the assignment for next time is to do problems 1, 3, and 5, Melissa would do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If the history professor said the assignment for next time is to read chapters 1 and 2, should do 1, 2, and part of 3. So that's extreme. Always, always, always doing more than expected. If you do more than expected in sports and school and sales and anything, you're going to lead the field because most people cannot do this. So, Doneen, could you speak to us for a second?
Hey, Doc.
When did you first start rodeo?
Oh, I started competing when I was 5 years old, Doc.
So 5 years old, and your big event was tie-down roping?
Well, I started that in high school, Doc, probably when I was 17.
When did you win the world championship?
When I was 52.
Now, is that a great story? Is that a great story? And not only that, Doneen gave me one of these ropes with the lasso on it. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, it's a calf rope.
A calf rope. And I stood up, and she got about 20, 25, 30 feet away from me, and she roped me right in front of the whole class. She roped me. So that is a great story. There is no great story without a great problem. I flunked out of college. Was I happy about that? My mother was totally flattered. Was I happy? That's a great story. That is a great story that I flunked out of the same college I got a PhD from. So your biggest problems are going to give the biggest and best stories. There's no great story without a great problem. Maybe you saw the movie Titanic. At one time, it was the highest grossing movie of all time. Was there a problem in that movie? Yes, the Atlantic Ocean. No Atlantic Ocean, no problem, no story, no movie, no Celine Dion, you know? But there was a problem. You need a problem. 10 days before the United States played the Soviets in the Miracle Game, they lost 10-3. That's a problem. And then they win. So thank God for your problems. Thank God for your inadequacies, because what do you want? You know, I want the people I work with to be better than I am. I want them to be better storytellers and better speakers and better teachers than I am. So that's the deal. Any questions, comments, ideas, opinions, cynical remarks, anything else you want to talk about? So what I'd like you to do is to put into the chat the one most important word you got out of our session today. Not just one word. It could only be one word.
Dr. Gilbert, I also would ask if you could maybe provide for the coaches on this call, what would you suggest they do to get started? I always come off of calls with you with a ton of notes and a ton of ideas. And sometimes I feel like I get paralyzed by what's my next step. So if you could maybe clearly outline for them, hey, here's what I want you to do today. And my suggestion would be, when this podcast comes out, go back through, listen to it, take notes again. And that would be the thing that I would suggest, is that put this in your car, listen to it consistently.
You got to tell me if I'm on track or not.
Sure.
You know, you and I speak at conferences, and when I go to the conferences, or whether it's a coaching conference or a teaching conference, and it's all information, it's all on PowerPoint. I tell my students, I said, get a gun permit, and if you ever see me using a PowerPoint, shoot me, okay? There's nothing. I mean, I walk up and down the corridors of my building listening to the other professors. It's all information. They're playing the wrong game. The game is inspiration. Look, if you want to learn anything, you don't need me to teach you how to rip a deck of cards. I will, but you could find this out online. You could go to YouTube. You could learn anything on YouTube. You know, that's the best university in the world, YouTube University. But the whole thing, where are you going to get inspiration? You know, you could find inspiration on YouTube, but it might not be particular to you. So, you know, it's like Brian and I have the same problem with sports psychology. Everybody will tell you how important sports psychology is. Do you devote any time to it? No. You know when they do devote time to it? You know, when I get people calling me to work with their kids, you know when it is? It's trouble. They were the 1 seed and they lost to the 32nd seed in the first round of the state championship in tennis. When their daughter fell 19 times, you know, in the Olympic qualifiers in figure skating. It's after there's a problem. You know, when do you take cardiac rehab? After you have a heart attack. Why don't you take cardiac prehab so you don't have the heart attack? So the whole thing is designate time to think of every day, how could I inspire these kids? Here's the one thing. So tomorrow you have soccer practice. What could you do when these kids leave practice? They're more inspired than when they came in, okay? There's a story about one of the great high school or one of the great grade school physical education teachers ever. And somebody once asked him, what makes you such a great physical education teacher? He said, well, every summer during summer vacation, they, you know, refinish the gym that I teach in. And they put, you know, they paint all the lines. He said, I have 3 goals every year. Goal number 1 is I want my kids to be so active that they totally wipe out those lines so that they have to be repeated. Number 2, I want my kids to be so active that they're rarely ever sitting down. And number 3, my biggest goal is every night at dinner time, when my kids are with their parents, I want them to talk about my class. So in a positive way, of course. So do something at practice that, you know, most practices are deadly boring. Do something that's called a patent interruption, something that's totally unexpected, you know, make fun of yourself, wear a weird uniform, do something, but get their attention, rip a deck of cards, see, I'm waiting for my kids not to pay attention to me. Then I put the ice pick up my nose, you know, if they live at home, they're going to be telling, and so every once in a while I meet some of my, like at graduation, I'll meet my students' parents. And I say, Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Dr. Gilbert. And what do you think Dad says? Oh, you're the guy with the ice pick, you know? So I said, that's good. First of all, he knows I'm weird. But second of all, more importantly, the kid's talking about me. But inspire people. I've been teaching for 40 years. And if I see a lot of my colleagues that I started teaching with, they retired 10 or 12 years ago. You know why? Because they read off the PowerPoint. They were just into the Krebs cycle. Let's talk about glycolysis. How exciting is that? I expect you, see, the goal of this little presentation today is so you could change the world, not so you could be a better storyteller. I want you to make the history books. You know, I was talking about this with my mother yesterday. The person that's really blowing it is Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci has the goods. He has the credentials. Everybody loves him, and he's playing it safe. You know, he's the one that, so if I could talk to Fauci, I said, what do you want to do? Do you want to get along with everybody in the administration, or do you want to make the history books? You could make history. You could be the Winston Churchill, but you're playing it safe. Are you going to go all out, or are you going to hold back? That's what you want to tell your soccer team. That's the most important question. Are you going to play it safe at practice, or are you going to give an extra effort? Are you going to be at the back of the pack when we're doing suicides, or are you going to totally exhaust yourself? You know, why don't you go all out? Don't work out, outwork. Good athletes work out. Great athletes outwork. So that leads us to the one most important. What word did you put, Mark? Is Mark still here?
Yep, he's still here.
What word did you put, the most important word you got out of this?
Extreme.
Okay. Now, if I want to ask you, what is the most important word in your life? What's the word?
Momentum.
So talk about momentum.
It's the most powerful thing in the world. We drastically overestimate what we can do in a day, but we drastically underestimate what we can do in a week, month, or a year. I mean, there's a lot of people on this call that are embody that word, momentum, right? I like to think of ocean as a metaphor. Like, where does that wave start? Does it start where it crashes? Of course not, right? And like Brian said earlier, it's the start that stops most people. Everything that, if you want to be great in life, you have to understand, grasp, and embody that word momentum, right? It's better to do a little lot than a lot little. If you understand and embody the word momentum, you can seriously change the world. Robin Sharma, who has a podcast called Mastery Sessions, he says, energy vampires or change the world. You can't do both. And you can change the world by getting on a podcast like this, understanding what it takes to tell stories, and then doing what Brian said about it in the speed of implementation, right? Implementing it into your life. These are the strategies. Now it's time for you to go seize momentum and change the world over the next weeks, months, and years.
I think if I can add something to that too, Mark, I think that sometimes with momentum, you don't feel it, you don't see it, because all those little decisions over time, right? That focus on the process of the day to day, that's the momentum, is that what you do on a daily basis, right? And I think sometimes, like I see it often with people maybe like yourself, where I haven't physically seen you probably now in a couple of years, but then when you do, you're like, man, you look different. Or like with kids, they look different, right? Or you look at just the growth of a speaker. If you see somebody, you're like, oh man, they got a long way to go, and then you see them 2 years later, and they've been working on their craft a lot, and you're like, wow, that's a completely different person. So I think sometimes when you're building that momentum and you're working that process, you may not be able to see it because it's hard to read the label from being inside of the jar. Would you agree with that?
It's 100%. And the way I look at it is that if you took the y-axis as your performance and the x-axis as time, you can take a bird's eye view or a worm's eye view of what's going on. And when you take a worm's eye view, problems look massive, right? But if you take a bird's eye view and look how far you've come and how small that problem is from a bird's eye view, that's where you can really understand. Although that today was just a slight uptick, right? And it's not too much, it's the difference, right? And you're absolutely right. You're all over it, Coach. And the fact that it might not seem like a lot, but you're still upticking every single day. And if you're able to take the bird's eye view rather than a worm's eye view, the problems look smaller, and you can be proud about your trajectory over the past few years.
Mark Lassini, at some point you need to share the story too about how you won the Pat Tillman New York City race. How many participants in that race?
Roughly 250. And, I think if everybody went all out, I might not have won it. However, I decided, it was a couple of minutes before. I signed up for the day before. I drove into New York City by myself. I took off at a sub 6 minute pace. And I was like, I'm just going to see if I can hang on until I catch on. And then it's just me and 5 other people. I was a little too heavy for the race. It's 4.2, and I felt like sprinting the whole thing. And I just beat somebody, and then I went on home. But I felt like I was doing it for Pat. I felt like I knew him by reading that book, Where Men Win Glory. And he took it in his off season. He went and ran a marathon. So I took my off season and ran the New York City Marathon when you did as well. And then when I heard about this race the day before, I was like, I got to go and I got to win this thing. The craziest thing you say, I can put on the video. I didn't even know if you knew this, but I'm wearing it right now, man. I'm wearing that shirt right now. That Pat Tillman honor.
There we go.
My father and I have this thing because we saw a Football Life with Pat Tillman, and he was known for walking into the family room and screaming on top of his lungs, "Every day Sunday, baby," and getting his family jacked up for Sunday football. So my dad and I scream that at each other. If we haven't seen each other in a while, we say "Every day Sunday, baby." After
love it. That's awesome. So there's a guy who's a lacrosse player. Was that the first organized run that you've ever participated in?
Yeah. It definitely was. I had no business being a part of it, but I always say it's about others. Doc and I always talk about that together. And I mean, if you set aspirational goals, something I wanted to chime in about, in what's the next step after we get off here, right? I break it down really simple into something called an MED method, where you set a mission, then you have your environment, and then it's the daily discipline. That's between you and you. But you set your triggers and you set your aspiration by writing your mission, right? It should make the hair on the back of your neck stick up. People should laugh at it because it's so aspirational. But you take 5, 10, 15 minutes to write down that mission. You should get your juice flowing, right? And then your environment is very important, right? I think that gets lost in the sauce, right? TAR, trigger, action, reward. Is that reward for tomorrow or long-term reward, right? And if it's a negative trigger, having wine around the house rather than a water bottle, you'll find you're stuck in tar, right? But if you set that environment, now all you have to do, the last thing, and it's more than 90% of the pie, is the discipline. Just showing up and doing it every single day. Like Brian, knowing you as a coach for as long as I've known you, we first met each other in 2014 or 15. You've come so far through momentum and stuff like that. What you're doing on a consistent basis is so momentum. It's so discipline. It's you're embodying peak performance, right? But that started with having a mission, then getting your environment in order, and then it's just between you and you, that discipline.
And then something I picked up from Dr. Gilbert on our last call is that when you do the discipline over time, the discipline actually turns into desire. It goes from being a have to into a want to. It's like if when we first met, if you said, "Hey man, you're gonna go swim for 30 minutes, ride your bike for 2 hours, and run for 30 minutes, and then get a half an hour lift in," I would have said, "What, in a month? Or in a week?" And that's like every day now, and it's every day because it's what I want to do. I like it. I feel better. I feel like I show up better for other people. And I feel like it's almost like it's like free drugs, man. And I feel like when you exercise.
What Jason was saying earlier about auditing your energy. I have a character coach who was a Navy SEAL for 2 years. And he talks about living this lifestyle as every day being a repetition. I love that idea. Every day is a repetition, right? It might be unsexy. It might be boring, right? But you have the energy to inspire. And that's huge, right? Because you need to get that mission and that environment in order before you have the discipline. I seriously think those are prerequisites, because if your environment's all over the place and your mission is not too aspirational, then showing up is really not going to do everything. But if you have aspirational North Star, like you've done with your entire life, now every day is a rep. And now every day you have enough energy to inspire, not just sometimes, but all the time, every day.
in the environment, this is other thing, the environment becomes critical because like you get into routines, right? Like the start of Corona season in March, people's routine got thrown off. So now you have to, your environment's not going to create itself. You have to be intentional about creating the environment, right? And then as coronavirus goes on, now here we are 100 plus days into it, your environment can become stale. So something as simple as like turning your desk, in your office, changing the setup. I went and got brighter light bulbs. I went and worked some part of my day outside, and then it became 120 degrees. That's not working anymore, so you move inside. I have a stand-up desk. So within my environment, and the stand-up desk is just a music stand where I stand up and put my laptop on there. So that environment changes, within the realm of the room. And I think I hear too many people say that they don't have, it's like a gym. Like people who say, I can't work out during coronavirus because I don't have access to a gym. The last thing you need to work out is a gym. For most people, the place that they go to work out, if the time it takes to drive there and drive home, they could get a workout in their yard, in their hallway, instead of making the excuses, they find a way to make it happen. So I think that's really good, man. Mission, and then create your environment. And then the last piece was the daily discipline. And I think one of the things that Dr. Gilbert talks a lot about is, I think I've met Dr. Gilbert in person, face-to-face 4 times. Once in Vermont, once at a seminar in New Jersey or Philadelphia, and twice in Arizona. And I can say that meeting somebody 4 times in my life in person, the guy's had more impact on me than anyone in my life, right there with Ken Ravizza and my high school football coach, John Allen. If there was a Mount Rushmore for Brian Cain, those 3 would be on the top. And, so I don't think you have to be in physical proximity with people, especially now. You can just be in proximity through Word of Success Hotline, proximity through Success Hotline, or through social media, but proximity through these calls. I think that becomes a big part of your environment.
Absolutely. This environment's got me ready to run through a wall. So I
know. I'm saying the same thing, man. I'm chomping at the bit here, and I'm 18 minutes late to my next call. So the guy's blowing me up. So Dr. Gilbert, thank you for being here. Dr. Gilbert's mom, I can't thank you enough. Jason, Thomas, Tony, Sabrina, Team Ironclad, Jose, Nikki, Deneen, Taylor, and JG, man, everybody, thank you for coming on here and making this. This was special. So thank you all for being here. Don't count the days. Make the days count. Thanks for listening to the Brian Cain Mental Performance Podcast on the Ironclad Content Network. If you liked the show, be sure to leave us a rating and a review, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter @Brian Cain Peak. I'll see you next time.